it's a real honour and a privilege to follow the noble lady contribution, and indeed to speak in such an important debate, and also to thank the noble lady for asking the government this key question. And I thank her also for never giving up on the fight for justice for the thousands of people serving IPPs. The annual report we're dealing with now, and action plan, are of course worthy and well-considered documents, there's no doubt about that. But what's missing is any recognition that the IPP sentence itself is indeed a form of torture, at least that's according to the United Nations. Like many others in your Lordship's House, I believe resentencing is the only way to end this torture. The chair of the Justice Committee in the other place, Andy Slaughter MP, recently wrote to ministers warning, and I quote, "The government may have misunderstood the committee's original recommendation on resentencing. Ministers keep saying resentencing would mean mass release with no supervision, but Mr Slaughter is clear that resentencing would not mean the automatic release of all IPP prisoners. And indeed, legislating for suitable supervision to manage risk will of course be necessary, indeed wanted by many of those in the system." His letter ends by encouraging ministers, as we do, to consider again establishing an expert panel to explore options for IPP resentencing, balancing the protection of the public with the justice for the individual offender. My Lords, despite the prison minister's concerns at last month's debate, I do not believe this would give false hope to IPP prisoners, not if the government made clear there was no commitment to resentencing at this stage, but to consider the matter further. The expert advisory panel would be there to do just that, give their expert advice to the government on what a resentencing exercise with public protection at its heart could indeed look like. Now, ministers also claim they're opposed to resentencing because they don't want to overrule or usurp the role of the parole board, which sounds on first listening quite reasonable. But last week, an answer to a written question by Kim Johnson MP revealed that since July, the new government have refused to follow the parole board's recommendations on transfer or release of IPP prisoners in over 45% of the times. Over 45% of the times. It's scandalous. Without wishing to sound cynical, some might say the government seem happy to hide behind the parole board when it suits them, but to ignore their advice, of course, when it doesn't. My Lords, in finishing, I urge the government to cut through the politics and let the Parliament solve the problem that Parliament itself created over 20 years ago, and to allow free vote on resentencing in both houses. This must be the fairest way to reduce the size of the IPP prison population, carefully, very carefully balancing public protection with the principles of justice and mercy. Thank you.